I'm Denise, I'm the Scottish one.
And she's a non-fiction editor. And I'm Louise, the English one.
And she's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Editing Podcast. So thank you to everyone for responding to our video about this Q&A. We've had an absolutely tremendous response.
Yeah, thank you so much for those Qs. And now it's time for the A's. So we've divided this into 2 episodes so we can spend a little bit more time on the questions. So let's crack on, Louise.
Right, so the first question was from Joanne in Canada, and she said, how do you handle authors not getting their work to you on time? I work in the proposals department of a large engineering company, and the authors almost always meet their deadlines. How do you project manage this part of the process? So I'll start with this, and Denise can come in later. I work with direct with indie fiction authors, Joanne, so it's part of my terms and conditions that the booking and the advance booking fee of £500 is for an agreed slot in my schedule. If the client doesn't deliver, then they lose the slot and the deposit. And I find that when someone stands to lose £500, they tend to make sure they're going to be on time. And I brought in this policy after a well-intentioned author let me down, and I found the confidence to do it when another author with whom I'd already worked had to cancel and offered to pay me for the work he was cancelling before I had this policy in place. And he's such a professional and my ideal type of client. So my advice with indies is to make sure that your T's and C's are clear about what the deal is, not just with deposits, but with cancellations too.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think we all learn that as we go along with our indie authors and just keep revising and adding to our T's and C's, don't we? Yeah. I think these are all really good points for indie authors, but when you're working with publishers, it's trickier, and you do have to be more flexible. Yeah. I've been burned a couple of times because there's been a couple of occasions where a publisher's schedule has changed and they've forgotten to tell me, and I haven't found out until I was, the day I was expecting to receive files, and then I'm chasing my in-house contact and they're like, oh gosh, no, we haven't. Did we not tell you? It's shifted by a month or whatever.
That's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. And sometimes nobody's deliberately leaving you out the loop, but I think sometimes they're so focused on the in-house, they forget about the freelancers that are, coming a bit further down the line. So I've learnt from that experience, and now, depending on how long the lead time is, how far ahead I've been booked, I'll generally check in with my in-house contact about a month before a project's due to start, just to say hello and ask if everything's on track, and then obviously if there's been changes they can let me know, and then certainly a week before I will always just drop them a line just to check things are still the way they should be.
Yeah.
And then the day before, I'll say I'm expecting these files today, let me know if anything's changed. But I mean, essentially it is out of your control, especially if you're doing, like I often do for publishers, it's proofreading, which is right at the very, very end of a huge, long, complex process. And, it's not even in your in-house editor's control. There are so many other factors that are influencing when these files ultimately get to you. What I would say is that if they do delay big time at short notice, I ask if there's any replacement work. They're not going to pay you for the time that you've booked.
Yeah.
You can't expect that the way that you can with an indie author. But I do ask if there's any replacement work. And often there's something that they can put your way. It may not be the same amount, but that's the best.
That is the thing with publishers, I guess. They do have a stream of work. It's not just one project, so that there is a chance that you don't have with usually with an indie author, that they will be able to give you something.
Yeah. And another point is that I will often have more than one project running at a time just to cover my back, just because you just don't know how the schedules are going to work. Yeah, and I think it's also worth saying as well that with indie authors, some of them can forget that if they're late, it has an impact on the other clients that you have, and you can't necessarily just push the work on because it'll impact the clients that are booked after them.
Exactly.
And that's not fair. That's not fair.
Even something like 3 days. If you're doing a 2-week project and your author's late by 3 days, but the project you've got booked in after that is only for a week, you're suddenly left with only 2 days
Yes,
to do a week's worth of work, and it's impossible.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's why it can't happen like that.
Yeah, and
So
you can't push another client's work on because a different
no,
client is late. So
yeah,
it's a
exactly.
squeeze happens with you usually.
Mm.
Yeah.
So our next question was from Linda in the US, and Melanie also chimed in from the UK with a similar concern. And they were asking about dealing with burnout and or procrastination. And Linda said she thinks that they go hand in hand. And then she says, I get to the point where I'm not wanting to do the work because it doesn't light me up anymore.
Yeah.
So I guess this could apply on a project by project basis, or it could be a more ongoing thing. You didn't actually say, Linda, what if it was um, if when you've experienced this, it was in either of those particular scenarios. But I do think it's something that people are struggling with a little bit more than usual at the moment. I think a lot of us have certainly had days when we've all felt we've lost our editing mojo.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Definitely.
we can all have that and all procrastinate a little bit. Some of us more than others.
Well, yes, I'll raise my hand here. Louise knows that I am a number one procrastinator. I need a deadline to get work done, and I tend to work pretty close to them, don't I, Louise?
But you always meet them.
I do.
And if you hadn't wondered what we're talking about, we're talking about how sometimes how we organise our various tasks to do with putting this podcast together. But Denise is never late. She always meets her deadline. But she's also someone who does. She's maybe sometimes more likely to leave it to the last minute, probably because it's not a necessary a priority because it's not. I'm not paying her.
That's true.
But anyway, here are some ideas for the two of you, Linda and Melanie. So the first is to try to mix something else into your schedule that you really love to do.
Mm-hmm.
So Denise is building a new website and developing her proofreading training course suite, and I'm creating some deep dive guides for fiction editors and authors. And and these things are connected with but different to the day-to-day practice of editing, and so they're a change for me and for Denise, which is as good as the rest, or so they say. So I
Absolutely, yeah.
recommend you think about that. Is there something you can introduce into your day that's just new and related to your business but fun,
Yeah, definitely.
exciting?
Yeah. And I think it's important to reflect a little bit and ask yourself, why is it that you're burned out or procrastinating? If you can answer that question, what is it that's affecting your mojo? What are the triggers? Is it this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all dealing with? Why isn't your work doing it for you? Is it the area that you're working with? Have you got stuck in a routine? Maybe you need to switch up your clients or explore new challenges, like Louise was saying, by sort of expanding your range a little bit. Sometimes it's because it's low paid work and we don't feel valued with what we're doing. And I think it can be very easy for editors and proofreaders to get stuck in a hamster wheel of needing to do the work for the money, having to work all the hours, not having time to look elsewhere, and just starting to resent it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it can really build up over time and creep up on us before we actually realise that that's what's happening. And even just simple things like, getting out and getting a bit more fresh air if you can help, or 5 minutes of mindful breathing practice, or yoga. That's my new thing at the moment. I've been doing a daily yoga practice, or meditation. Just introducing little things that just are refreshing can make a difference, I think.
And this is something that Denise and I have both been doing at the moment, actually, because I was wondering about whether a change in diet might help you. So we both switched to lowish carb diets, and
Yeah.
we're both feeling a lot more energized. We were talking about this, weren't we? Partly because I
Yeah.
think because we're sort of doing it at the same time, we're doing it together, but
Mm-hmm.
even though we live hundreds of miles apart, but it's
Yeah.
definitely physically affected me. I mean, apart from losing a bit of weight,
Mm-hmm. Actually,
just
and
got a
it made a difference quite quickly as well. I think that was
yeah,
the thing. Yeah.
yeah.
So it wouldn't necessarily be a low carb diet that would work for you, but it might be that a change of diet in some way
Yeah,
would help.
just yeah.
Switch it up. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to mention for Linda was whether it's joining something like an accountability group might help, where you can work together to set each other goals, not just about editing, but other sort of side related work too.
You love an accountability group, don't you, Denise?
Oh, I do. At one point I was in 3. I'm in 2 properly now, and I just love them. They serve different functions,
Yeah.
and I get a lot out from them, and they are becoming more popular, definitely. I know lots of editors are in accountability group. But the other thing I would suggest is to watch Louise's unboring business planning video, because in that she talks about business planning as being like a gift to yourself. What do you want and how will you get it? So this kind of planning might inspire you or get your creative juices fired up. It might. So think of the paid for editing work as the means to those ends, because that's what will subsidise it. So do you want a new PC, or to buy a particular training course, or learn a new skill, or maybe take up a new hobby? If editing's the thing that facilitates that because it provides the income that will pay for it, then it's got a new purpose.
I think sometimes that can really help to sort of you to actually just remember
Yeah,
why we're doing this stuff
yeah.
and
Sort of focus it in
um
a wee bit, yeah.
yeah. Um, the other thing that you might consider is creating new revenue streams from your editing knowledge, like courses, books, webinars, training, consultancy, and maybe dedicating some time to creating plans about what those would look like and strategies for how to bring them alive and make them visible would be exciting. That stuff is hard work. Melanie, we know you know this because of that proofreading research project you did.
Yeah.
Huge, amazing thing. But it's that kind of process can be energizing. At least I hope it was energizing for you, Melanie. But it's energizing because it's new, not because it's
Yeah.
not hard work.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't need to have an end date in mind for something like that, but
Hmm.
just exploring an idea and mapping it out can be quite invigorating, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing you might want to think about is maybe you'd like to collaborate with somebody on a project. Obviously, Louise and I do the podcast together. Not only does that half the work, but it makes it fun, and we can
Mm.
hold each other accountable, so we don't get burnout because we're too busy making sure we don't let each other down.
That is so true, though.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
true.
And if we do get stuck with time, well, we just check in with each other and we help each other out. So it's like someone has your back, which is amazing. So think about how you might scale your business sideways or introduce some variety into it with someone who thinks like you and who you already have a great relationship with.
And just one more thing to say on this issue. You don't have to love your job 24/7,
Yeah.
365 days a year. I mean, sometimes it's interesting because some of the editing Facebook forums, I hear some of my colleagues talking about how they live and breathe editing. They were sort of born to edit, and I do like I love my job, and sometimes I don't love it. Sometimes I just like it on certain days.
Yeah.
If it just, and that might not be the client's anything to do with the client's work. It might just be how I'm feeling, but it's okay if it's not feeling like a vacation. It's okay to do a great job without it being the be all and end all. You don't have to live and breathe it. My husband is a good example. He's someone who's great at his job. He's very dedicated, but he's not shy about saying he'd like to be paid to watch the telly all day. so, so like sometimes it's just like that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
You feel like you're procrastinating over stuff. You feel like you're a bit burnt out, but it's your job,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's okay.
It's absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, and it's from Alexa here in the UK. And Alexa asks, how do I get more fiction editing work from indie authors? She says, most of my work is for publishers and is generally non-fiction, although I have worked on some children's fiction and picture books. I'm going to do Louise's Switching to Fiction course, but I'm not sure how to market it as a specialism when it isn't that just yet. So I think for this one, I'm going to hand over to Louise.
Um,
Is
so
that
my
right? No, should
advice.
I? Should I have handed it? I don't know. Was I supposed to say that? All right.
Oh, go
I
on, I'll
don't
have a
know.
crack at it.
Okay.
Just won't let you near any of the business or educational questions.
Okay.
So Alexa, my most successful strategy has been a content marketing strategy. So creating blogs, booklets, other types of content that answer fiction authors' problems. And what that means is that you don't have to worry about whether someone knows it's your specialism or not. What you're doing is making that particular type of content visible on the search engines, and so that when authors visit your site, they trust you more because they can see you know your stuff. So the fact that maybe in the past that hasn't been something that's taking up most of your client work time is neither here nor there. The point is that you're solving problems. And
Yeah.
so that's not the only way you can do it. I mean, I know others do networking in fiction writing forums and have had success with it. My only issue with that is that it requires constant vigilance, and it's not searchable. So it could be effective, but it can also be draining. Whereas if you write a blog post about, say, using language appropriate for middle grade kids' books, that's something you write once, but you can share it over and over. You can place it on your website, and it's there for as long as you want it to be. It's something you only have to do once, but you can repurpose into a PowerPoint slide or a booklet or something else. So what I mean is that you do one thing, and yes, it takes you time, but you get value from it forever. It's evergreen content.
Yeah. It's totally worth it as well, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it takes time, but it's time that it reaps the rewards over a much longer period of time.
Yeah. The other thing about you, Alexa, is that you're a published author of children's books. So you know what the problems are. You know what you're talking about. You've sat on the other side of the fence. So use all that authorial experience to guide you. But also, don't be afraid to make it known that you know that's part of your messaging. You've walked in fiction authors' clients many times. You know what it's like to work with a publisher. You know what it's like to be edited. You know what it's like to have someone design a book, a cover for one of your book hits. You know what it's like to have to meet a writing deadline. Some of your clients don't know all of this stuff, but will go searching for answers to those questions, and you can answer them because you've done it. So write about the problem and how to solve it.
That's such a good point, yeah. And having been on the other side of the fence is such a valuable perspective to have, Alexa.
Especially in that specialist area.
Yeah. So make the most of it, definitely, yeah. And Alexa also asked about time. She said, I think I'm maybe just quite a slow editor and proofreader, but I feel it takes me all my time to get the work done, and I'm then not spending time on my business, doing the blogging, etc. She said she'd love to have a strategy for incorporating the creative aspects around her business too. What says you, Louise?
So I totally get what you mean, Alexa. And although I don't necessarily, always myself work to the same numbers I'm going to give you here, I'm just going to give you a suggestion and see what you think about it. So how about this for a solution? Can you find 30 minutes each day to focus on your content? So let's say on Monday you spend 30 minutes writing a list of things your clients would find interesting. I just gave you a few when I talked before. So let's say 30 blog post titles. So you have my blogging course too. I know you do. So that'll give you some ideas about how to work out what those blog post the focus of those blog posts would be and those titles would be. So that's Monday. And then on Tuesday, you have another 30 minutes. And this is where you pick one of those titles and you start planning. So the title, the main headings and the subheadings, and maybe a one-line summary of each section that you're going to write about. And then on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, you spend 30 minutes filling in some of those paragraphs. Now, I don't know when you write fiction whether you approach it as a pantser or a planner. But if you're a planner, then you've probably recognized some of what I'm talking about here. So it's just small steps each day. You break the task down, and rather than thinking, oh my God, I've got to get my blogging strategy sorted and I have no time, you think in smaller steps, one post at a time or several sections of that post at a time.
It's so important because I think it's very easy for people to think, oh, gosh, writing a blog post, quite rightly, can take hours of my time. I'm never going to have a block of time big enough to do that. But it's completely doable to split it up like that. I think that's a great suggestion.
And then it's sort of, you get away from that feeling of being overwhelmed by it. And just like, it's just like when you go out for a walk, you don't think of the whole walk. You think about the little steps you take at a time, the journey of it, and it doesn't all have to be done at once. Just thinking a little more on that, can you multitask some of that as well? So perhaps this is something I do. Maybe you can take a soak in the bath and think about things you could write about. Or I love coming up with ideas. This is so sad. I spend my bath time thinking about my marketing strategy, but never mind. Or maybe you could take a coffee break and just pull away from your editing for 30 minutes and do this completely different thing instead. And just one more other thing to throw into the bag, and then I'll hand over to Denise. Buffer is a really great free scheduling tool that means you can massively reduce how much time it takes you to actually schedule those posts once you've got them.
Definitely.
You, Alexa, are already engaging on social media. Facebook and Twitter is where I see you the most. So use that time and space to share your own stuff. You're already wonderfully generous about sharing other people's content. People will share yours too.
That's a really good, thorough answer that Louise has given you there. And I just want to give you some of my perspectives here too, Alexa, because I think you principally work on non-fiction at the moment, and that's where I do most of all of my work. And I think also you have to be realistic about the hours that are available to you, and I think you get better at doing that, and realizing that just maybe because you're sitting at your desk for 7 or 8 hours in a day or whatever it is, you're not editing that whole time. And I think it took me a while to acknowledge that and actually reflect that in how much time I allocated for jobs. And if you're a slow editor, well, what does slow even mean anyway? I think that's maybe just a value judgment you're placing on yourself without maybe necessarily having any hard evidence to back that up. So be kind to yourself there. And focus more on what are you getting through your projects effectively. And to do that, I would say take advantage of all the things that we've talked about in other podcast episodes, because I know you've listened to them all, Alexa, about things like using macros or working efficiently. I tend to work on multiple projects simultaneously, and they're educational books, so I track everything. I track everything in Toggle, which is free. And I track things by units or chapters. I work back from the deadline and I divvy up the work so that I know approximately how many chapters or deadlines I have, chapters or units I need to do each day. And the other thing is I don't work linearly through, and I know this is not unique to me, lots of editors do this, but it's something that people definitely improve with over time, I think. I don't work linearly, so I take multiple passes through multiple units or chapters at the same time, looking for specific things. So I'll use checklists built from my brief or from the style guide, and I'll perhaps go through and check all the headings across not just all the pages in one file, but all the pages in all the files, because then I'm focusing on that one specific thing, and your
I think that's something that's
tuned in. Sorry, Louise. Yeah.
I'm sorry. That is something I think that's really, really good tip for non-fiction work, because there are often so many elements.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great tip.
It's one of the things that I teach in my introduction to proofreading course, is that methodical approach and using checklists and taking multiple passes at things and not panicking that you're not actually reading anything yet, but you're focusing on other elements of it, because there can be so many different elements in a non-fiction book that you need to address. So I find that really improves my efficiency. It feels counterintuitive initially, but it definitely works better over time.
That's some brilliant tips there for not only her Alexa's fiction strategy, but also for coping with her current workload as well. So thanks for that.
Okay.
Our next question is from Katie in the UK. She asks, can you address contracts, please? For example, isn't email discussion enough, or should there be something more formal in place? And if so, what sort of layout and content should it have? Email agreements are fine. One thing you might consider, Katie, however, is creating something that encourages the client to take a specific action. So indie authors, you could follow my example and have a booking form that forms a contract of services too on your website. So if you go to my terms and conditions page and take a look at mine, it asks the client to tick specific boxes, and those boxes mean that they're agreeing to the price, the deposit, and that they've read and agreed to the terms and conditions and so on. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this or to lay it out. What's important is that your client understands what they're agreeing to. And by using a website contact form, which is all mine is, it's just a tweaked one of those. You have something specific on file that's about that project. And in my case, a client can't fix their slot on my schedule without having filled that booking form in.
That's really good advice there. I mean, effectively, you write your own contract with your client, and your email exchange, which, as Louise said, can be enough. It clearly outlines the scope. As long as it does that, it forms part of your contract. And the key thing about it is I always send an email asking them to confirm that they've accepted all the details in the email below. So you've got an email chain, and then you have a confirmation from them that they're happy with all those details, and that's enough. But yeah, I also have a terms and conditions and that sort of thing too. If you're a member of a professional organisation such as the CIEP or Editors Canada, or IPED, it may well be that you can get contract guidance and model terms and conditions that are available from there for members. I know the CIEP does have some, and I think they're being updated at the moment actually. The other thing to say, that's all fine and very much within your control if you're working with indie authors and certain organisations, but publishers, you're much more likely just to be expected to sign their contract based, working to their terms, which is fine. But there are some things that you do have to watch out for. And the big one in particular for editors and proofreaders is for an unreasonable indemnity clause, which effectively asks you to indemnify them against all losses as a result of your actions or inactions. And this could be to the tune of tens of millions of pounds. So these clauses, it's not reasonable for an editor to sign a contract with them because you don't have the final sign-off on the document most of the time, so you can't be sure that what you return is therefore what is being used. So there are very few circumstances where you could say that an editor or proofreader would be responsible for something that caused a publishing company major losses. I am not a legal expert, so don't take anything I say as gospel, but this is something that crops up frequently with editors, and there's a lot of discussion about it on editors' Facebook groups, in the CIEP forum, so that's not something you should sign without having somebody else look at it, definitely. So our next question is from Maria, who's also in the UK, and Maria's wondering what to include when she emails publishers for work. She asks, would you just send your CV or do a detailed email as well, in the same way that you would with a covering letter for a job application? So Louise, what's your take on this?
So I haven't worked for publishers for some years now, but this is my approach that I used to take. Publishers are busy, so keeping on point is key. Give them what they need to know. They need to know you can hit the ground running and that you're fit for purpose. So tell them about things like the training you've done, your prior editorial experience, the subjects you specialize in, for example, social sciences, education, or humanities, the software you can use, for example, Word or a PDF editor, that you can work with styles and templates if required, that you can use industry standard markup language like the BSI proof correction symbols, and that you're happy to do a test if required. But the other thing you might consider is designing an attractive one-page PDF flyer that summarizes these key points, so they have something that they can keep on file. So something that's a little bit more interesting to look at than a bog standard CV or resume, but and I say both of those words just because I sort of use them interchangeably, but I know that particularly some of our colleagues in Canada and the States differentiate them. But I'm talking about just something that looks a little bit more engaging and that's really, really focused. So not something that's talking about what job you did like 15 years ago, but it's editing focused.
I think that's a really good point. I think the key thing to remember here is something that Louise mentioned already, is that in-house editors are busy people, and they will be inundated with requests for work or expressions of interest, and so you want to be able to grab their attention without making them think, oh God, here's a whole huge wall of text that I have to read. So something that's attractive to look at and gets the key points across quickly is really important. So I would say, keep your introductory email short. highlighting key relevant details, like Louise said, that'll interest them enough to maybe investigate you a bit further, whether that's clicking through to your website or having a look at your LinkedIn profile or looking at the one-page flyer that you've attached. But I'd be interested to hear from any in-house editors who are listening about how they prefer freelancers to interact with them, because it's a good thing it's a good question to ask, and it's one that possibly the answer might have changed over time.
And certainly when I did a little round table with some in-house editors the other day through the literary consultancy, and they didn't talk specifically about what to include, I don't think, but what they did make it clear that they were happy to and expect to hear from freelancers. So this is sort of a slightly side question, side answer, but people who are looking to get freelance work for publishers shouldn't feel shy about making direct contact. Publishers have their hands raised. They understand what we do and how we can be of value to them. So, do feel positive about doing that.
Don't be afraid to get in touch with them. I think that's the thing. Yeah.
So our next question is from Ilse, also in the UK. We have got people from other countries coming up. And Ilse says it would be wonderful to hear about any tips on ways to link up with others. So we can answer this quite quickly, actually, Ilse. Mm-hmm. Sorry if you feel like you've had less rabbiting time from us, but so the Facebook community for editors is huge. That's where I would recommend you go. Editors Association of Earth Facebook group and its sister groups on fiction, professional development. I think there's a few more as well. And there's also a group called Editors Who Talk Tech. So head to Facebook.
Definitely, that's a good starting point. Yeah. And you're in the UK, so I'm going to say that if you're not a member of the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, CIEP, you should consider joining. You'll have access to its forums, which are always busy and full of people from all over the place with different levels of experience and different specialisms. They also have about 40 local groups who meet regularly. Obviously, at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic, they can't meet in person, but they're all meeting, well, almost all of them are meeting via Zoom at the moment, which is absolutely fantastic to see. And we also have an annual conference, which normally happens in September. And again, this year, because of COVID, it's not going to be in person, but we are currently exploring how to make it virtual. So yes, definitely
exciting. Yeah. And the one thing I would say is, just to add to that, is that it took me a little while to join. I think it was maybe a year before I joined the CIEP or the SFEP as it was back in those days. But I had no idea before I joined that how many friends I would make there, and that is the thing. It's not just about linking up with other editors. It's about an opportunity to form friendships with people who do what you do for a living, and it's how Denise and me met. I mean. Yeah. We'd seen each other online, and then we ended up sitting together at a conference one year and had a bit of a giggle, and we got to know each other more and more, and the rest is history, really. But
it's got a lot to answer for, hasn't it?
Yeah, it does. So Ilse, if you have the budget for it, and you and do please go and have a look at the CIE website. It's such a fabulous community. It really is, and it's international. It's international as well. It's not just a bunch of people in the UK. It has members from all over the world, and it has a very international ethos.
That's a really good point as well for all our overseas listeners. Yeah. So next up is somebody from overseas, and that's Tanya, who is based in Canada. And she says, as someone who has clients in different countries, I'd like to know how best to work with different currencies and fluctuations in exchange rates. Do you choose a base currency, the one where you live, and do the maths every time you quote a different currency? Or do you set an hourly or per word fee in all of your currencies each year and keep it in place regardless of what exchange rate fluctuations are doing? What do you think, Louise?
I might be being a bit lazy, but I work in pounds and I invoice in pounds, and PayPal does the conversions automatically when payments are made using that. I think the bank does them too.
Yeah.
If we're doing direct bank transfers, but I like to keep things simple. I think around 60% of my clients are not in the UK. So, and I've never had any problems with it. And the reason I do it like that is because I just don't want to faff around with currency fluctuations. What I'm really concerned with is how much it costs me to live where I live. And it hasn't bothered any of my indie fiction clients so far. And so when the pound tanked after the Brexit referendum, I even appeared a bit cheaper. So it can even be an advantage sometimes to be invoicing in another currency. Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, if you're happy invoicing in multiple currencies, then go for it. I mean, there's no right or wrong about it, but just keep it simple, I think. If you think your clients will care about it, then the time that it takes you to do it is just a cost of business and has to be borne. But I think do what feels right to you, Tanya.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Katie from the UK again. I think we've already answered one of Katie's questions.
We have. She put 2 in.
Put in 2 in, that's right. Katie says, I'm just starting out and I'm wondering what to put on my invoices. What do I do about VAT? Do I charge it? And if so, at what rate? I am not yet registered as a freelancer or as a limited company. Do I claim the VAT back? If so, how? Well, Katie, there's quite a straightforward question to this. In the UK, you don't need to be VAT registered in the UK unless you earn over £85,000 a year. Instead, you can just register as a sole trader and you don't have to worry about it at all.
Yeah. And there are certain things that legally need to be on your invoice, though. I would recommend heading to gov.uk. It's pretty good for guidance on this kind of information. But briefly here, as a sole trader, you need to include a unique identification number. So it could be your initials, a month code, and a chronological number or something. Just make it up. Your personal name, your business name, your address and contact information, the address of the customer you're invoicing, a description of what you're charging for example, a 50,000 word proofread, the date the service was provided, the date the invoice is being sent, the amounts being charged, and the total amount owed. And if you were registered for VAT, you would have to put on that, but you don't have to worry about that. So yeah, that just do go and have a look at the gov.uk site, but those are what you need to have.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be anything complicated. I use my invoices. I use Word, and then I have a template, and then I just save each one as a PDF, which is another point worth bearing in mind. If you do create your own, don't send a Word document. Always save it as a PDF.
Yes, good idea.
So it can't be changed. But Louise, I think you use Wave, which is free, and you can create your own custom invoice templates in that, can't you?
Yeah, lovely, sweet little tool.
There are other options that editors use, like QuickBooks. I use QuickBooks for recording my transactions, but I don't produce invoices from it just yet. There is a small charge attached to that. I think it's about £7 a month or something like that. It just depends on what you want your accounting software to do. It's also a good idea to put your bank details on your invoice too. Louise and I both do this. It's standard practice in the UK. At the bottom of every invoice, I have my bank name, sort code, account number, and I also have my IBAN and BIC or SWIFT numbers, which are used for international bank transfers. And Louise and I were discussing this earlier. We know that some of our colleagues overseas, particularly in North America, are quite cautious about providing this information, but as we said, it's standard practice in the UK. There's no more information provided there than would be on a cheque that you wrote, and to my knowledge, nobody's ever had an issue with having that information on their invoice. It makes it easier for your client. Yeah. So finally, for this episode at least, we're going to answer a question from Maeve in the UK. And Maeve says, I'd love your advice on the order in which to tackle starting up a business. For example, networking and finding clients are high priority, but do I need to have a brand and a website up and running? Should I be active on social media, etc. first? How about productivity tools? Well, I think we can help you in all these counts, Maeve. I think you're very wise to start organising yourself while you're still training. So the basic things I'd want to ask you is, do you have the physical kit you need now? Have you got a decent computer, a good internet connection? Have you installed Word, because it's the standard, industry standard, and really most people expect you to work in it?
Good. Yeah. Good point.
And some form of software for working with PDFs. If you need a PDF editor, then PDF Exchange is much cheaper than Acrobat, but it has good functionality. But my understanding is that there can be compatibility issues with PDF Exchange and importing text from that into InDesign. If you're basically focusing on working as a proofreader and don't need to actually edit your PDFs, then Acrobat Reader DC is free, absolutely fine. It's the industry standard and it's more than enough for proofreading. That's what I use. I don't use anything else. Yeah.
Good point. So I think, considering your after you've thought about the sort of physical and technical stuff you need, I think considering your brand identity is a good place to start, because it requires us to think about who our clients are and what their problems are, and who we are and what we stand for. And that means that when we come to think about the way we communicate our message and our marketing activities, we do so in a way that's consistent, that's on brand. So branding and marketing are aligned, but if you sort of do your branding later, you could end up finding that you have to sort of go back on yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I sort of motored along with my marketing for years, and I was very committed to it. But actually, when I sat down and really delved deep into my brand identity, and I found that I needed to change a lot of things, and I'm glad I did change them. It's just if I'd known what I know now, I'd have done all this at the beginning.
Yeah, but it's a journey, isn't it? Yeah.
That's how we always describe it when we haven't done things quite in the order we should have done. Oh yeah, well, it was a learning experience.
It's a learning curve. Yes.
Yeah.
So Maeve, once you know who your ideal clients are and you've worked through a brand strategy, you can incorporate all that into the look and content of your website so that your message is coherent and it really resonates. Otherwise, you'll do what Louise did and spend a lot of time faffing around with a website and then changing it all to make it fit a brand, rather than the other way around. Yeah.
So next up, if you've decided on a business name, at least get a single landing page up on a website so that visitors have some way of finding out more about you in a space that you control. But ultimately, a website should be about your clients rather than you. It should be a space in which they feel like you're solving their problems. And that's what we'd both recommend if you want a website that's going to stand out, because there are lots and lots of editor websites out there, but most of them are sort of very much focused on sort of making a big deal out of training and qualifications, all of which are important, of course. But the thing is that you don't stand out then, because nobody ever sort of launches an editorial website saying that they're really rubbish and that they don't have any training. And so it's a strong baseline which should absolutely be in place, but it shouldn't be it shouldn't be the thing you're trying to sell on.
Yeah.
And that's why if you get your brand strategy sorted, then your website can become a really powerful marketing tool.
Great, yeah, definitely. But alongside that, you can start planning how else you're going to get in front of all those ideal clients and think about what tactics you're going to use. Is it going to be content marketing, which is what Louise and I both advocate? Are you going to be using phone calls or letters or sending email to publishers? Are you going to try in-person networking? Are you going to focus on using social media? The strategy that you choose will absolutely depend on who your target clients are and where they hang out, because you need to meet them where they hang out.
And if you're focused on early on thinking about your brand strategy, you'll have already gone through that, had that conversation with yourself about who your target clients are, what they look like. So that's why we've suggested this order. Finally, productivity and efficiency tools will be great. But they're not the priority now during training. You don't want to overload yourself. Instead, give yourself time to discover what you need. But in the meantime, use the freebies available, online dictionaries and thesauri, and paid tools can be added later once you're settled and once you know where the value is for your particular type of chosen work with the kind of clients you're working with. You don't want to end up forking out for, I don't know, InDesign is really, really amazing software, apparently. but I never use it, and so there's no point in me having it. And so, you might hear people raving about it, but actually it's not necessary. Other people rave about the Chicago Manual of Style, but do you need an online subscription? Perhaps not. I do, but that's my type of work. So work out. Just give yourself a little bit of time to work out what you need.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's it for this episode. We'll be back again in part 2 very, very soon.
Yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. We've had a great time putting it together. Thank you so much for listening to the Editing Podcast. You can rate, review and subscribe to us via Apple Podcasts, Spotify or whichever platform you prefer. And we'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.